We know that CSS stands for Cascading Style Sheets, but it's important for us to understand what cascading means. When we talk about cascading, we usually refer to styles being passed down the HTML tree and cascaded from the parent to its children. For example, if we have a piece of HTML code where we have h1 and p and ul all based within the body tag, we can apply a specific property to the body tag, knowing that the property will then cascade, the style will cascade further down the elements within the HTML tree. For example, color red applied to the body will make all the elements red. Now we know that not all properties are inheritable and can cascade further down, but we know that color is passing down through the HTML tree. So let's have a look at it in a greater detail. So if we would like to apply elements to all of them, if we would like to apply a style to all the elements within the tree, we would probably list them and group them as we have realized that by using a comma. So looking down our HTML example where we have h1, p, and ul, we can highlight h1, ul, p, and li all together and then provide a specific color. Now, we have also learned that to avoid this, we will be able to use the body tag as our selector, and this will apply all the property of color green to all the elements within the body. In theory, that's true. In practice, this is slightly different. So for us to understand this, we'll have to look at an example, and we'll have to start from a simpler example to see how this works. Let's have a look at an example where we have a body and h1, and we would like to apply the color to the body as green. We would also like to then use a specific h1 selector to specify that the color of the heading will have to be navy. Now, I've created a little example that I would like to show you and to see this in practice on how this simple inheritance with only a few tags will work. Here I have a simple cascading example. Let me open it with Sublime and show you what we have in the code. So we have embedded style sheets just to avoid having additional files and linking them here. For simplicity reasons and to have everything in a single page, I've decided to keep use embedded styles rather than linked. So the styles include h1 and p, and both of these tags are applied a color green. So within the body we have of our HTML page we have h1 heading and two p tags. Given that h1 and p are green, in the browser we should have all of the tags displayed as green. So let's open this up and see how it works. We open this up, we can see that everything looks fine. Both the heading as well as the paragraphs are in green. Now what I would like to do here is open up the inspect elements and have a look at developer tools. Now when you click on developer tools, we know that we can select and play with HTML elements, but what we haven't done just yet is paid attention to the styles and how they appear here. So we already noticed that we already mentioned the default styles of our browser. In this case, h1 is implemented in a particular way, right? But we also can see the specific styles applied to h1 as well as p. So this is the information coming directly from our style sheet. Now, what I would like to do here is introduce inheritance. So rather than having h1, comma, and p, I would like to change the code, comment this out, and use inheritance here where the same style is applied to the body. So I'm using body and color is green, semicolon. Let's go back, refresh it. We see that the outcome is exactly the same. However, in the developer tools, somehow the body appears further down. So you might have noticed that the window which displays the styles which are applied here are appears just under the window of the user agent style sheets. Now, we don't have to go into details why this takes place, but it's important for us to understand that the browsers are will have to identify which specific styles will need to be applied to the HTML and which styles will need to take priority, right? So at the moment, everything works as usual, but what I would like to do now is to apply the second style where I'm introducing H1 and wanting to change the color to navy. Now the browser will need to decide now which style will have to apply here. Should it be green, or should H1 continue being green, or should it be navy? Let's have a look at what the outcome will be. Let's refresh this. Let's save this before we refresh it, and we can see that the heading is now colored in navy. So the most interesting thing is happening in the developer tools, where looking at the body, we can see that this no longer is active, and instead we have H1, which is overriding the rules which are provided which are being cascaded through inheritance. So body no longer applies, but H1 does. Looking back at the example, we can see that the rules are applied in the order of distance within the HTML tree. Body is further away, while HTML is closer within the HTML tree, and we can say that the closest one will override the inherited property. I would also like to talk about a more complex example, where using inheritance does not work in the way that I have described a minute ago. So to demonstrate this, I would like to go to a slightly more complex example where we're using the HTML block coming from the very first slide. So let's open this up in Sublime. We have the body, which is in color green, and we also have the HTML code, which is coming from the slide that I have shown a minute ago. We have the body with a number of tags here. So let's assume that I would like to assign all the tags the same style. So I would either have H1 list them individually, and that's just what I'm going to do. P, UL, LI, and A. UL, pardon me, LI and A. I think this covers all of the tags. And I will also assign color green. I will assign color green to this style. I'm going to take this out for now, but we will bring this back in once we see what the result of this is. So let's save this and let's open it up in the browser. So let's go back, open it up, and we can see that all the elements within our document are green. So let's open the developer tools again and have a look at this. So we can see quite specifically that H1 is actually green, including the rest of the tags. Now, let's change this code slightly. I would like to comment this code now and uncomment the actual body, where the color property will be inherited from the body and all the way down through the HTML tree. Let's save this and refresh it. Now, the result is slightly different. We can see that the heading is green, that the paragraph is green, the UL and LI are green, but we have an element which is a link within a paragraph and the LI, which remains blue. So this is interesting. Let's have a look at and try to understand why this is happening. When I click on heading, everything is fine. The green is actually inherited from the body. The same is happening for the P. but the A tag in this case is no longer inheriting the color green, but instead is taking the regular color from the default user agent. Now this is interesting. Why is the browser ignoring the color style that I have provided within my own CSS and is applying something which is coming from the default browser settings? And the reason for this is due to the so-called concept of specificity. The reason the default styles are overriding our inherited style is because the A selector that default styles are using are more specific. Let's go back into our presentation and try to see what exactly specificity is. Specificity is an important concept because it allows the browser to deal with style conflicts. When there are different styles applied to various elements, then the browser is referring to the so-called specificity score. Calculating specificity is based on the types of selectors that we're using. We know that there's a universal selector, the star. It has technically no value because it's simply not specific enough. But we have element selectors, we have class selectors, ID selectors, and inline styles, where the style is actually written within the HTML code. Now, element type selectors are least specific, so the value of this is 1. Class selectors are more specific, so they are 10 times more specific than the element selectors, and the ID selectors are 100 times more specific than the element selectors. Inline selectors are most specific because they are actually positioned within the HTML code. Now, we know that this is bad practice and we should not be using inline styles, but this provides you some information, some context on how much precedence, how much weight is actually assigned to the values of styles which are provided through online styles. Now, there is a very simple formula on how browsers calculate the specificity of the selectors that you're using. Now, if we have a look at an example, this will hopefully clarify how it actually calculates it. Even for a complex selector that we can see on the screen, which is UL, hashtag nav, li.activa, the specificity, calculating the specificity is fairly easy. Now, we know that A corresponds to a element selector. It selects our anchor. Li refers to an element selector, and UL refers to element selector. So we have 3 element selectors in this selector itself. So we can put this down as 3 element selectors, and this will populate part of our specificity score. Now we know that classes are 10 times the weight of the element type. Do we have a class here? Yes. Dot active is a class, and we know it's a class because it's a dot here. So there's only 1 here, and therefore the value for this will be 1. So far the value of the score is 13. Do we have an ID here? Yes, we know. We have an ID here because there's a hashtag, and hashtag nav is our single and the only ID used in this particular selector. Therefore, the score will be 113. Similar approach can be applied to the second example, where we have 1, 2, and 3 element selectors. So that's why the value is 3. And then we have dot call3 and dot ie7, 2 class selectors, and therefore the value here is 2. There is no ID selector, and we assume that these are not used in inline styles. So therefore, the score for the first one is 113, while the score for the second one is 23. The highest score has got higher specificity. Let me propose a challenge here. I've created a little table and would ask you to complete and calculate the specificity score of different selectors. The first one is H1, so obviously it's a single element selector. We don't have anything else, therefore the score will be 1 here and 0 everywhere else. So the specificity score for H1 is 1. I'll leave the rest to you, and as a challenge, I would like to ask you to post the answers that you get on the discussion board, and the very first correct answers on the discussion board will get a little prize from me. So moving on, let's talk about the conflicts. Specificity is a very important concept when identifying which rule will need to take precedence. However, there are situations where the selectors that we're using have got exactly the same specificity score, and the browser still has to make a decision which one of the rules will have to take precedence. For example, you can have a CSS file where you have a p tag being styled in red, yet further down in the same document you can have the same rule with exactly the same specificity where the color is blue, for example. In this case, both of the tags have got the same specificity score, and therefore there is a conflict, and the browser will need to identify which style to apply. The browsers are applying the rules which are closer to the end of a file. In this case, p color blue will take precedence. The similar rule applies within the declaration. For example, if you have a declaration block which contains a number of declarations, and there is a conflict between the declarations. For example, there is a background color yellow appearing further up, and then background color purple appearing further down. The one which is appearing further down take precedence. Understanding inheritance, as well as the rules that the browsers are using for applying the styles where conflicts appear, is not trivial. Experienced CSS developers are facing these dilemmas all the time. But using developer tools and working with CSS on a daily basis will help you understand this more.